Chapter 427, Stomping onto Janslater Dark Angel. Kurisushui Gu Cheng had once held 20th place on last year's Prodigy roll, and back then he was already known to be at the second layer of the spiritual pedestal tier. Yet with Linghan's eyes today, the truth was even more startling. Shui Gu Cheng's aura had already climbed to the 4th layer of the spiritual pedestal tier. That sort of leap was hardly strange. Before one reached the flower blossom tier, there existed no lack of alchemical pills that could hasten cultivation. With a powerful sect standing behind a genius, pouring resources into them for a year could naturally produce a terrifying transformation. And if it weren't for the fear that excessive eagerness might ruin the foundation, Shui Gu Cheng's realm might have risen even further. Take Xu Xuaner for example. According to the intelligence gathered, she should only have been at the 2nd layer of the spiritual pedestal tier. Yet now, she was shockingly at the 5th layer. For prodigies like these, their cultivation could change dramatically in mere months. Anyone who insisted on judging them by old records would only end up being fooled. On the prodigy roll, the one who followed after Shui Gu Cheng was Ji Dairong. The records also noted that Ji Dairong refused to accept his ranking. And every time he encountered Shui Gu Cheng, he would challenge him without fail. The small figure seen earlier fit Ji Dairong's description perfectly, especially that unmistakable hammer. As the prodigy tournament drew closer, more and more figures of every background were surfacing, like hidden dragons and crouching tigers stepping out of the rivers and lakes. Linghan shook his head. Ken Ye, Liu Yutong, and Zhu Wuju all intended to participate this time, and their ambitions were not small. They didn't merely wish to appear on the list, they wanted a high rank. Yet judging by the situation now, their chances did not look bright. At first, Kan Yi's cultivation had been the highest, and his odds of claiming a good ranking were the best. But he had broken through to the spiritual ocean tier before refining the heavenly luckstone. Unless he stepped into the spiritual pedestal tier, the heavenly luckstone would have no effect on him at all. Thus, his ability to challenge above his realm was, at most, comparable to Zhu Wuju, after Zhu Wuju reached the spiritual ocean tier, and it was far inferior to Liu Yutong after she reached the spiritual ocean tier. If Kan Yi couldn't seize an overwhelming advantage in cultivation level, then in terms of battle prowess, he was certainly not as strong as Liu Yutong. With these thoughts turning in his mind, Linghan continued toward Forget-Not. It was nearly lunchtime. Yet when he arrived at the restaurant, what greeted him was a sight that made his gaze sink. One of the sidewalls had been blasted open with a huge hole. Workers were repairing it, and not a single customer sat inside. His brow furrowed. What happened here? Zhu Wuju's face was gloomy as he answered. Just now, 2 maniacs were fighting. One of them got struck, and his body crashed into this place, smashing out that hole. Fortunately, only a few waiters were injured. No one died. Linghan's anger flared instantly. One of them, was he short with a small build carrying a hammer? Yes. Zhu Wuju nodded hard, then blurted in shock, How did young Master Han know? Linghan didn't answer. He turned and left at once. Young Master Han, where are you going? Zhu Wuju hurried after him. To find those 2 bastards and settle accounts. Compensation first, Linghan said, his expression dark as iron. Zhu Wuju's voice trembled. Young Master Han, those 2 are on the prodigy roll, both at the spiritual pedestal tier. One is 20th, the other is 21st. He hadn't known earlier, but after hearing passers-by arguing heatedly, he finally realized those maniacs had such terrifying status. Linghan didn't even look back. So what? I'll beat them first, then drag them back, and make them work here for a month. Zhu Wuju couldn't help shivering. He knew Linghan's strength and astonishing battle prowess, yet the gap between the spiritual ocean tier and the spiritual pedestal tier was an entire major realm. Moreover, Shui Gu Cheng and Ji Dairong were both on the prodigy roll, people who could also challenge above themselves. They were not opponents to treat lightly. You stay, Linghan said coldly. The restaurant needs someone on standby. Yes, yes! Zhu Wuju nodded repeatedly, and as Linghan's back disappeared, Zhu Wuju finally remembered something and felt a little calmer inside. Linghan was an Earth-grade alchemist. Even if the one ranked first on the prodigy roll appeared, they would still have to lower their head and address Linghan respectfully as Grandmaster. How could he have forgotten that? He'd worried for nothing. Linghan strode through the streets, making inquiries as he went. Shui Gucheng and Jide Rong had fought so fiercely that witnesses lined their path like fallen leaves in a wake. People were discussing it with heated excitement everywhere. There was no need for him to pry. He only had to listen. Following the trail of rumor and testimony, he closed in quickly. But after more than a dozen minutes, he heard someone say the battle had already ended, and the two had returned to their respective residences. Linghan chose first to pursue the shorty with the hammer. Asking along the way, he arrived before an inn. He drew a breath and roared, "Shorty G, get out here." The inn, which had been loud moments ago, went dead silent in an instant. What kind of situation was this? Someone actually dared to order the man ranked 21st on the prodigy roll to get out, and even called him Shorty G. Wasn't that the same as poking a hornet's nest? Everyone knew that even if Jide Rong wasn't first in rank, when it came to temper, he was unquestionably among the top 3. Peng! Sure enough, a moment later, a window exploded outward. A small figure sprang out. Normally a body that size wouldn't cause much damage, but a massive hammer was slung over his shoulder. The impact alone nearly split the room into 2 halves. What bastard dares insult your Lord Ji? Jide Rong's eyes bulged with fury. To remain on the prodigy roll, he could be no more than 30 years old, yet with his face buried under thick sideburns and a beard, he looked like a man of 40 or more. Linghan walked straight up and said, "You fool, you smashed my restaurant. I'm here to haul you back and make you serve as a waiter." "Ha ha!" Jide Rong stared, stunned for a heartbeat, then burst into wild laughter. Had he heard wrong? Someone wanted to capture him and force him to work in a restaurant? He sized Linghan up several times and said, "You're amusing, but don't joke with your Lord Ji. Joke with your mother." Linghan shot forward, lifting 1 foot high, and a ruthless kick swept toward Jide Rong's face. Insolence! Jide Rong flared. He could appreciate humor. But this brat actually dared to kick him. The audacity was outrageous. He decided to teach Linghan a small lesson, leaving him alive so he could later trade a few jokes to relieve boredom. He moved and casually reached out, grasping for Linghan's foot. But in the next instant, his expression changed drastically. The force behind that kick was terrifying, and a chill rose in his bones. Was this really someone at the 9th layer of the spiritual ocean tier? Pang! The foot landed squarely on Jide Rong's face. With that crushing power, Jide Rong was stamped straight down. Pang! His body slammed into the ground, and a hole appeared instantly as his entire head sank into it. That stomp carried overwhelming destructive force. So what if Jide Rong was ranked on the prodigy roll? The impact still knocked him unconscious. His limbs sprawled uselessly, and he lay there like a dead dog. Everyone nearby turned pale in shock. There were many cultivators staying in this inn, some preparing to join the upcoming prodigy tournament, others here only to watch. Naturally, they all recognized Jide Rong. Yet this young elite had been knocked unconscious by a single stomp from someone's foot. In that moment, countless people who had intended to participate felt their courage collapse, thinking of withdrawing instead. My gosh, if a monster like this was present, what was the point of joining? He could teach them reality at any moment. All at once, the entire area fell into complete silence. Chapter 428, Finding Shu Cheng again. Dark Angel. Kurisu. Ha. Interesting. On the 3rd floor of the inn, a window stood open to the wind. Within that frame of light was a man tall and slender, his face refined as if carved by a careful hand. He looked to be around 30, yet his bearing was still sharp and youthful. His black hair was thick and dark, the sort that made onlookers think of dashing heroes from the Jianghu, the kind that could set a woman's heart into a frenzy with a single glance. This was Yu Kunlun, the one ranked first on the prodigy roll. Yet he had already crossed the threshold of 30, and so this year's prodigy tournament no longer had a place for him. He turned his head slightly and spoke toward the side. "Junior sister, this fellow below ought to be among your toughest opponents in the prodigy tournament." Beside the window stood a young woman whose presence carried an otherworldly grace, as if she had stepped out from a painted scroll. Her figure was shapely enough to draw covetous stares without effort. A thin silk veil covered her face, though the delicate lines of her features could still be faintly made out. Her black hair spilled down like a waterfall, and her skin was pale like flawless jade. With the slightest movement, she could stir the heart. She gazed down and replied with cool disdain. First, Jidaerong was careless. So careless he never imagined a cultivator at the 9th layer of the spiritual ocean tier could wield battle prowess at the level of the spiritual pedestal tier. Second, Jidaerong's battle prowess is merely worth 10 battle stars. Yu Kunlun threw back his head and laughed. Junior sister's ambitions soar high indeed. To judge 10 battle stars as merely, only you would speak so. The look he cast at her was openly admiring, filled with unmistakable fondness. The girl was a peerless genius who had only recently risen within the Great Mercy sect. Her name was Hua Yinghan. She was only 22 this year, yet her cultivation had already reached the 3rd layer of the spiritual pedestal tier. She had not participated in last year's prodigy tournament, for back then her cultivation was too low. It was only 2 years ago that she had suddenly surged upward like a blade drawn from its sheath. Her progress was frighteningly swift, enough to alarm the higher ranks of the Great Sorrow sect. Now she had already been placed among the core disciples, one to be heavily nurtured and developed. Yu Kunlun's purpose in coming this time was twofold. First, to watch the battles, and second, to act as Hua Yinghan's protective escort. Hua Yinghan behaved as though she had never noticed Yu Kunlun's adoring gaze. Her aspirations were too lofty. Even if Yu Kunlun was ranked first on the prodigy roll, her heart remained unmoved. What she truly revered were the geniuses of the Middle State. Only 2 months ago, she had heard word that a genius from the Middle State had appeared, someone who fought the golden blood demonic ape in the Dark Devil Forest and shone so brilliantly that even older generation flower blossom tier cultivators seemed dim by comparison. That was the kind of figure she considered a true dragon among men. On a distant tower, Shen Zhongcheng's hand tightened around the hilt of his sword as if the weapon could sense his intent. His eyes, fixed upon Ling Han, burned with pure battle spirit. He had already broken through to the spiritual pedestal tier. Since he had failed to obtain the heavenly luck stone, he could only force his breakthrough after perfecting his cultivation to the limit. This young man would be worthy of a fight. Even farther away, a plump young man had wriggled into the crowd like a fish slipping between reeds. With a quiet shuffle, and without the slightest sound, he deftly plucked a spatial ring from the hand of a spiritual pedestal tier youth. Then he drifted off to the side, giggling as though he had just witnessed something delightful. That tanned brother of mine seems to be getting stronger and stronger. On another tall tower, Yan Tianzhao's silhouette emerged. At this moment, the aura spilling from him was shockingly that of the peak period of the spiritual pedestal tier. A green light flickered within his eyes, shifting into strange patterns that looked eerie and unnatural. Ling Han hauled Jidaerong up, and with a casual sweep of his hand, the blood-sucking origin gold flew forth. He used it like a binding cord, cinching it around the shorty's legs. Then he turned and walked back the way he had come. Chila, like dragging a piece of filthy cloth across the ground, Jidaerong was pulled along behind him. The spectators sucked in cold breaths. That was a spiritual pedestal tier elite. More than that, someone listed on the prodigy roll. So long as he did not fall, he would certainly step into the flower blossom tier in the future. Yet now he was being dragged through the streets like a mangy dog. Was this truly proper? Ling Han didn't care in the slightest. It wasn't as though he had never offended flower blossom tier figures, counting them up. Ao Feng was one, Elder Nine Clouds was one, Yao Huiyue was another. So why would he fear someone who would only reach flower blossom tier in the future? He was going to find Shui Gucheng again. Those two had wrecked the wall of his restaurant and injured his staff. Until his employees recovered, these two would serve as waiters in his restaurant as compensation. The kick Jidaerong had taken was truly vicious. He still hadn't woken even while being dragged like this. Fortunately, spiritual pedestal tier cultivators constantly used origin power to temper their bodies. Their skin and flesh were tough and sturdy, so being hauled along the street wouldn't kill him. Otherwise, he would have been mangled long ago. Ling Han began asking around for where Shui Gucheng had gone. When people saw he was dragging someone behind him, those he questioned turned uneasy and didn't dare answer. But there were also those who loved nothing more than to see the world descend into chaos. They happily told him where Shui Gucheng could be found, and some even volunteered to lead the way. Shui Gucheng, it turned out, was enjoying himself at the Vivipendrar. Listen to the Rain Pavilion. Listen to the Rain Pavilion was the city's famed den of luxury, an establishment built for burning money. Yet for cultivators, payment could be made in gold and silver, and that was hardly a concern. Gold and silver were only worldly objects. With a wave of the hand, they could be obtained, and thus they could be spent just as freely for pleasure and entertainment. Ling Han dragged the elite, currently ranked 21st on the prodigy roll, right through the open streets. Naturally, the commotion swelled. More and more people poured in behind him, laughing and whispering as they followed. This spectacle was too outrageous, too big of a joke to miss. Who is that young man to actually defeat Jiderong? Don't know. But it wasn't that he was truly stronger. Jiderong was careless and gave him an opening to exploit. Careless or not, Jiderong is still a spiritual pedestal tier cultivator. Speaking of this, didn't the white-robed Sword King defeat quite a few spiritual pedestal tier cultivators back when he was only at the 9th layer of the spiritual ocean tier? How can those spiritual pedestal tier cultivators compare to Jiderong? Besides, another year has passed. Jiderong's cultivation would have risen a lot. He's definitely not someone an opponent in the spiritual ocean tier should be able to beat. You're making me more and more curious. Who exactly is this young man? The chatter grew louder and louder, brimming with excitement and curiosity. How had such a monstrous youth suddenly appeared? It was obvious that in the new round of the Prodigy tournament, Ling Han would seize a place for himself, and his rank would certainly not be low. Perhaps he might even suppress the lofty rank the White-Robed Sword King had achieved 3 years ago. Firstly, Ling Han was stronger. Secondly, many people had already passed 30 and were removed from the Prodigy roll. Ling Han walked at the front. The crowd surged behind like a long dragon of onlookers. The procession was strangely majestic as it rolled all the way to the Toomey. Listen to the Rain Pavilion. "Toothpick Shui, get out here!" Just as he had done before, Ling Han called out with the same blunt audacity. His voice boomed like thunder. No matter how loud the music and dancing inside, it could not drown out that roar. "Jiderong, you bastard!" A furious voice exploded from within. "If you want to fight, I'll oblige, but in another month, you're going to die." In only a short time, Shui Gucheng burst out. Compared to Jiderong, Shui Gucheng's appearance was much more pleasing. He was tall and slender, with an air of nobility and dignity around him. His bronze skin looked as if oil had been rubbed over it, gleaming under the light. "Yi." The instant he rushed out, he sensed something was wrong. Jiderong was sprawled on the ground, being dragged along like a dead dog. This. How could that be possible? Shui Gucheng's gaze snapped to Ling Han. In terms of strength, he and Jiderong were essentially on equal footing. The gap between them was too small to speak of. If Ling Han could defeat Jiderong, then defeating him would naturally be possible as well. Who wanted to be humiliated in public? Unless there was no other way, Shui Gucheng absolutely did not want to clash with Ling Han. "Young man," Shui Gucheng asked with a grave expression, "where have I offended you?" Ling Han snorted, then casually delivered another kick into Jiderong's body and said, "You and this idiot fought right out in the open street and damaged the wall of my restaurant. You also injured a few of my staff. It's a busy time and we're short on hands, so I can only take the 2 of you back. You'll work as waiters for 1 month as replacement." Hearing this, everyone's mouths twitched. Over such a trivial matter, he had beaten a Prodigy Roll elite until he looked like a dead dog. If Jiderong knew the reason, he would definitely howl curses. Since when had elite cultivators on the Prodigy Roll become so cheap that they could be treated the same as ordinary waiters?